Welcome to Chapter 8. What are the components of a bond? There are four main objectives in this chapter. The first objective is to understand what is par value. The second is understanding what the coupon rate is. The third is understanding the term. And the fourth is understanding the market value. So let's get started. Okay, in Chapter 7, we had a scenario where we had a CFO, Chief Financing Officer, named Julia, and Julia was responsible for getting a $500 million loan from the bank in order to build a new headquarters building for her company. And so the bank created 500,000 bonds and they issued all these bonds down to the investors. So some of that might not have been crystal clear to all of you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the bonds from the investor standpoint. So as we look at these people over on the right hand side of the screen, let's take one person, one of these individuals, and look at one of their bonds more in depth. So here is one of the 500,000 bonds that the bank sold, and it went to this investor named Joey on the screen. And as we look at the bond that Joey is holding, we are going to start right at the top and work our way down. So at the top of the bond is simply the name of the company that issued the bond, which is Dream Hotel Empires. So this is the person or the company who is responsible for issuing that. Joey receives his coupon payments regularly, and also whenever the bond matures, he is going to receive his $1,000 back. So let's look at the par value now, or also known as the face value. This is simply the dollar amount that the bond was originally issued for, which is $1,000. So in order for Joey to buy this, he has to buy the bond for $1,000, and then that's also the amount of money that Joey is going to receive whenever the bond becomes mature. And so now let's move down and look at the term. As we look at the term, we can see that the date that this bond is issued is 1st May 2012, and the date that the bond becomes mature is 30 years later on 1st May 2042. So when Joey buys that bond from the Dream Hotel Empires company, he buys that bond on 1st May 2012 for $1,000. Then whenever the bond becomes mature on 1st May 2042, Dream Hotel Empires company is going to have to pay Joey his $1,000 back that he initially purchased the bond for. So in between all the time, in between those 30 years, Joey will be collecting his interest rate on his $1,000 investment at 5%. When you look down at the bottom here, I have two coupons. Back in the olden days, whenever you buy a bond, you would actually get a whole booklet of these coupons. As you can see, there is a dotted line at the center. So what Joey would have done with his first coupon is that if he would have bought this back in olden days, not right now, because everything is electronic now. You would have had this booklet, and what he would have done is he would have torn off his first coupon at the dotted line, and he would have mailed this to the Dream Hotel Empires company, and he would have received the $25 check back, just as long as he would have mailed it in after 1st October 2012, which is 6 months after the first initial date of issue. So each time you see the date, the next one you can see on the right side, which is 1st May 2013, Joey would have mailed that in, and he would have got another $25 check from the Dream Hotel Empires company. And so you would continue to do this for 60 coupons because they're being paid 2 times a year. And so you can see if we add up the 2 coupons for the first year, that would be $50. And $50 from the $1,000 par value is 5%. So that's how you get the coupon rate of 5%. Is just adding up the coupons that you have received for the entire year, and that becomes your percent. So really, it's that simple. If Joey would buy this bond on the day it was issued and he would hold it until maturity, he would get his $25 check every 6 months, and at the end, he would get his $1,000 back. And that's all there is to understand how the bond works. of course, it can't be simply that easy. And this is where really understanding how bonds truly work is important. It gets a little bit more involved when you start talking about the resale of the bond. Let's assume Joey did not want to hold on to the bond for all 30 years. That's where things get tricky because the value of the bond is constantly changing as market conditions change. And I briefly touched on this subject in chapter 7, and I might have moved a little bit fast there. So, what I'm going to do is just kind of go a little bit slower here so you understand how the market value of the bond changes through time. So, let's assume that Joey bought this bond on day 1 of the issue, which is 1st May 2012, and now we are going to warp ourselves in the time 5 years later. Okay. And what we are going to do is we are going to move the interest rates from when Joey initially purchased the bond. So when Joey purchased the bond, interest rates were around 5%, and that's what he bought his bond for. But now 5 years later, interest rates are now up to 6%, which is a lot better if you would be buying new bonds because you'd be getting 6% of those 5%. And so what happens is on his bond value has gone down significantly to $871. Okay. Now let's look at 15 years. Let's assume Joey just bought this bond and he held it for 15 years and he wanted to sell it 15 years later, and we look down there, we see the coupon rate that he bought it for was 5%. That's not going to change. We look at the interest rates and it's still at 6%, but you look at his bond value and it's higher than it was at the 5-year mark. So that's kind of weird. So let's go ahead and look at if he was going to sell this bond at 29 years, meaning there is only 1 year left on the bond before it becomes mature. And let's look at what would happen if those interest rates stayed exactly the same. So his coupon is never going to change. That's 5%. And interest rates are at 6%. We are going to assume that interest rates did not change. They are still at 6%. But look at his bond value. It is 990 now. As we look at these different scenarios, why is this value on this bond changing? When the coupon didn't change, interest rate did not change, and only the term changed from 1 year being left on the bond to 15 years being left on the bond, and then 25 years being left on the bond. What you are going to find is if you are going to buy that bond at 29-year mark and there was only 1 year left, you are going to receive two coupons. You are going to receive two $25 checks, and then you are going to get $1,000 back. So why would I be willing to pay a lot less for this bond, knowing that I am going to make my $1,000 back, get back my $1,000 at the end of the year? So the value, what you are going to find is that the longer that you hold the bond, the closer that it approaches 30-year mark, or whatever the term is on the bond, that the bond is going to approach the value or its face value. But the longer that the bond has before it becomes mature and those interest rates change, that bond value, that market value on the bond is drastically going to change. Okay, and that's really important to understand if you are buying a long-term bonds. And as we talk about the strategy, when we get into how the markets move and things like that, you are going to find that if you are buying a high yielding bonds, you are definitely going to want to buy a long term bond, just as long as you are buying a good company and a stable company. Long term bonds are good if you are buying bonds at a really high interest rate, because when the interest rates drop, you get the exact opposite effect, which I am going to demonstrate now. So let's assume that interest rates dropped 1% as opposed to rising 1%. Now I want to highlight a term here that you might want to hear when you start getting involved in bonds more. And you are going to hear the term basis points. So we are talking about a coupon of 5% here, and interest rates go down to 4%. That's called a 100 basis point. 1% changes 100 basis point. So if it drop 2%, that would be 200 basis point. So that's just some terminology kind of take with you. So if you hear that you understand what people were talking about. So in the last scenario, we had the interest rates raised, but now what we are going to do is we are going to look at Joey holding the bond for 5 years, and then he is looking to sell it. So his bond, the coupon rate when he bought it was 5%. but interest rates are lower right now, 4%, and his bond value is $1,157. So let's look at 15-year one now. Same coupon, interest rates are down 1%, but its bond value or the market value of the bond is now only $1,112, which is lower. Then as you look at the 29-year one, it's really close to the bond's maturity. That is just 1 year from the maturity. So the bond value is going to be really close to the par value, which is almost $1,010. That is $1,010. So what's really unique about bonds is that if you buy a long-term bond and you get it at a really high interest rate period, and you generally expect the interest rates to continue to drop, you would potentially turn around and sell the bond only a couple years later for an enormous premium. Because if a person buys that 5% bond and interest rates are 4%, in order for them to compensate all that money that they would lose over the long haul, they have to pay that much of a premium in order to make the same amount of money. So that's important stuff to really comprehend. And if you did not get it, I would recommend to go back to this lesson again, listen couple of times until you fully understand this concept, because this is very important. Understanding how Charlie Munger, Monish Pabrai, Warren Buffett invests. So here is how I calculated the bond values for those three scenarios. Like 5 years later, the bond value or the bond price was 1157. On 15 years later, the bond value or the bond price was 1112. And 29 years later, the bond value was 1010 when the interest rates was 4%. That is, interest rate dropped 100 basis points from 5% to 4%. You can search online for the bond value or the bond price calculator. I found this financial calculator in the Google where we can enter the face value, which is $1,000. Annual coupon payment is 50 because we are getting $25 twice in a year added up to $50. Annual yield is 4% now because we need to calculate the bond price for the 4% yield, and the years to maturity is 25 years, still 25 years. So once you hit enter, you will get the bond price for each of those scenarios. So here is the summary. If you can remember this, you are going to be good. When interest rates go up, bond prices go down. When interest rates go down, bond prices are going to go up. It's really that simple. And that's what you really got to understand and take away from this lesson. So in this chapter, we covered the terminology for par value. We talked about what the coupon rate was. Then we talked about the term. And then we talked about how market value changes with interest rates. And so I look forward to seeing you in the next chapter. See you soon.